Patanjali Yoga Sutras form the basic text of yoga. In order to understand Patanjali Yoga Sutras, it is necessary to have a little background of Indian philosophy. Indian philosophy has two branches. One is the orthodox branch and one is the unorthodox branch. We refer to them as Astika and Nastika branches. The orthodox or Astika branch comprises of those philosophies which accept the authority of the Vedas, and the Nastika branch comprises those philosophies which don't accept the authority of the Vedas. The Astika branch has 6 philosophies, and the Nastika branch, among the various philosophies, the most important of them being Buddhism, Jainism, Charvaka, Sikhism, and so on and so forth. In the Astika branch, the 6 philosophies are the Vedanta, the Mimamsa, the Nyaya, the Vaisishika, Samkhya, and Yoga. These 6 philosophies are referred to as Shada Darshana. Shada means 6, and Darshana is the term for philosophy in the Indian context. Darshana means a vision, not a superficial vision, but an insight into reality or the essence of things. Each of these 6 Indian philosophies, which accept the authority of the Vedas, has a sutra work forming the basic text of that philosophy. Accordingly, we have for Vedanta, Badrayan's or sage Vyasa's Brahma Sutras. For Mimamsa, we have Mimamsa Sutras of sage Jaimini, Nyaya Sutras of Gautama, Vaisishika Sutras of Kanada, Sankhya Sutras of Kapila, and for yoga, we have Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Thus, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras form the basic text of yoga, which is one of the 6 orthodox Indian philosophies accepting the authority of the Vedas. These 6 Indian philosophies always go in pairs. So we have one pair of Vedanta Mimamsa, another pair of Nyaya Vaisishika, and the third pair of Sankhya Yoga. So generally we talk about yoga as Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya forms the theoretical or metaphysical basis for yoga practices. That is the reason why Sankhya is referred to as practical yoga, and yoga is referred to as theoretical. Yoga is referred to as practical Sankhya, and Sankhya is referred to as theoretical yoga. The cosmological, epistemological, and metaphysical basis for yoga practices are provided by Sankhya. Simply speaking, what this means is that when you are asked, why are you doing a yoga practice, a particular practice, whether it is an asana or a pranayam or mudra bandhas, you have to fall back upon Sankhya to explain the why of yoga practices. That is how Sankhya forms the theoretical or philosophical basis of yoga practices. Hence, it is necessary for us to understand Sankhya philosophy, at least in brief. As I mentioned, Sankhya is originated by sage Kapila, and the basic text of Sankhya is Sankhya Sutras of Kapila. Unfortunately, Sankhya Sutras are today lost to humanity, and in place of Sankhya Sutras, the earliest and the most authentic text that we have is Sankhya Karika of Ishvara Krishna. We'll just have a look briefly into Sankhya philosophy so that we are able to understand Patanjali Yoga Sutras better. Samkhya is termed as an uncompromising dualism, atheistic realism, and spiritual pluralism. We'll consider each of these terms. When we say Samkhya is a dualistic philosophy, we understand that Samkhya has got two metaphysical principles, two basic assumptions. These principles are referred to as Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the principle of consciousness. Prakriti is the principle of matter. And when we say that these two principles are uncompromising, what we mean is that neither Purusha is dependent upon Prakriti, nor Prakriti is dependent upon Purusha. They are both eternal, infinite, existing entities. Samkhya is atheistic. Theos means God. Atheistic means non-belief in God. So when we say Samkhya is atheistic, what we mean is that in Samkhya philosophy, there is no necessity or no place for the principle of God. Purusha and Prakriti are, as the basic principles of Samkhya, are sufficient to explain the creation of the universe, the preservation of the universe, the dissolution of the universe, as also the place of man in the world, the purpose of man's life in the world, and what is the truth of man's existence. So there is no place for God as a principle in Samkhya philosophy. Samkhya is a realistic philosophy. We understand by realism a philosophy which accepts the reality of the external world. This can be understood when it is contrasted against idealism, wherein we consider mind as the only reality and the external world as illusion or maya. So Samkhya asserts the reality of the external world. Finally, we say Samkhya is spiritual pluralism. What we understand by this is Samkhya is a spiritual philosophy because the truth or existence, truth of existence, the reality which is considered as consciousness is spiritual in nature. And here we understand by spiritual in nature that it is not perceptible by the sense organs. And it is this reality, the realization of which is the goal of Samkhya or yoga. Samkhya is spiritual pluralism. By that we mean that there are as many Purushas in the universe as there are living beings. Also, unlike in Vedanta, where the soul on self-realization of the yogi goes and merges with the universal consciousness, in Samkhya and Yoga, there is no such merger. The Purusha of an individual who has attained to Kaivalya or Nirvana or Moksha remains aloof. There is no merger there. So accordingly, it is a pluralistic philosophy. There are as many Purushas as there are living beings. The interest for us in Samkhya to understand Patanjali Yoga Sutras is hinging upon how do we understand a human being? What is the makeup of a human being? Since Samkhya starts with two principles, Purusha and Prakriti, it asserts that all animate and inanimate objects in the universe, living and non-living, are made up of these two principles, Purusha and Prakriti. So matter and consciousness together make up every object in the universe. Coming to the context of human being, a human being is also a composite structure of Purusha and Prakriti. The Prakriti, the Purusha in us is the consciousness, and the Prakriti in us is the body, the mind, the intellect, and the ego. So the body, mind, intellect, ego complex is the Prakritic part in us, and the Purusha part is the consciousness in us. That body, what we are referring to, also includes the sense organs, the organs, senses rather than sense organs, the senses of knowledge, the senses of action. Out of these two parts, Samkhya, in line with all other Indian philosophies, asserts that our real self is the consciousness. Of course, when we go slightly deeper into philosophy, when we talk about reality with R capital, we mean by reality an entity which does not change, which is permanent. And just a brief consideration of these two aspects of human beings makes it obvious that the Prakriti part in us, which is the body, mind, and ego, is continuously changing, so it cannot be the real part. And the consciousness does not change, so consciousness is the real part in us. We are truly, or in reality, we are consciousness. So the reality in us is consciousness, but because of avidya or ignorance, we consider the Prakritic part as the real. And when that happens, whatever happens to the Prakritic part is appropriated by us as happening to us. So when a man grows old, when the body grows old, the man says, I'm growing old. When the mind is depressed, the man says, I'm depressed. When there is intellectual conflict, the man says, I'm in conflict. So a human being or man in general, because of the false identification between his real self and the false self, he appropriates all that is happening to the Prakritic aspect in him as happening to himself, and so all the sufferings and miseries in life. Having come to this conclusion, Samkhya says, for one to get rid of or eliminate all the miseries or sufferings in life, this identification between Purusha and Prakriti has to break, has to be got rid of. One has to disidentify oneself from one's false self and get established in one's true self. That is the goal of Samkhya philosophy. That is liberation, that is salvation. And in terms of Samkhya and Yoga, that is Kaivalya. When a man gets established in his real self, that is Purusha, that is consciousness, all his miseries and sufferings are over, he is once for all liberated. This is the goal of Samkhya. Thus, Samkhya provides a description and definition of human being, which makes it easy for every man to move towards the goal, and that goal is the complete elimination of miseries and sufferings of life. Incidentally, the term Samkhya has got two meanings. When we pronounce Samkhya with an M, emphasis on M, Samkhya, it means Samakhyati. Samakhyati means right knowledge. And that right knowledge pertains to the knowledge of your true self, that is consciousness. And when we pronounce Samkhya with an emphasis on N, Samkhya, it means numbers. So Samkhya is a philosophy of categories. There are 25 categories in Samkhya. When any individual understands those 25 categories, one understands Samkhya philosophy. With this background of Samkhya, now it becomes easy for us to understand or go towards the understanding of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. As I mentioned, to repeat, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras thus forms the basic text of yoga. It is sourced in the Vedas. It accepts the authority of the Vedas, and the Yoga Sutras are compiled by Patanjali, by sage Patanjali. Just a few observations on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras before we go into the sutras themselves, the texts themselves. A sutra work is a work of oral tradition. A sutra work is compiled at a point of time when there was no written material, when there was no pen, ink, pages to write upon. So knowledge is passed orally from the guru to the disciple to the shishya. And that is how the sutra works originate. And because they are a product of oral tradition, they are unique in their nature. Sutra literally means a thread in which normally flowers are weaved to form a garland. In the context of philosophy, a sutra refers to a garland of beautiful ideas. The uniqueness of sutra arises from the fact that it is perfectly precise and there is maximum economy of words there. It is short, pithy aphorisms like formulas, which when they are explored and exploded, give rise to rich ideas. Even to explain one single sutra may be comprising of 2-3 words. One may have to write pages and pages, but all that knowledge is incorporated beautifully in that sutra of 2-3 words. So there is maximum economy, brevity is there. Also, every sutra work has its own logic, has its own specific architecture. Just to give an instance, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras display a logic wherein Patanjali gives the most important thing first. Or if I put it differently, the conclusion is put first and then the explanation happens. This is running all throughout Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And when one understands this logic and the structure, it becomes easy to memorize. So sutras are also referred to as mnemonic in nature, meaning it is easy to memorize the sutras.